So somehow in the last couple of years I became a Shoujo fan. Well, I say that, but the third anime I ever watched was Ouran High School Host Club, so I shouldn't be surprised, really. I've noticed that a lot of these depict really unhealthy relationships. Oh, the female lead is so frail and like a small animal, and what is her secret? And the answer is years of malnourishment and domestic abuse. But that's not what I want to focus on today. I want to focus on male leads with an obsessive affection for the female lead, because that's what I see most often. I don't understand the appeal of someone who likes you so much they straight up do not care if the feeling is mutual. But it does appear to be common. Now then, for many reasons, I'm not exactly an expert on relationships, let alone healthy ones, but I'm pretty sure that if your stated plan to get the girl, we're already off to a bad start, but if your stated plan to get the girl includes a step that could be accurately described as cutting off her escape routes, something's gone wrong. Now, there's a sliding scale of these types of things, and the higher end of it can either be hilarious for just how fucking absurd it is, or it could be really upsetting because these are really upsetting things that are happening, even if the story does not portray it as such. And yeah, this is going to be a sort of heavy subject material I'm talking about, and if that is not going to be comfortable for you, this is your warning. Okay? Okay. But not every obsessive male lead is particularly interesting to talk about. If we went through every single male lead that did something that was not okay, I would be summarizing the entire fucking genre, and this video is not long enough for that. So I want to focus on a specific subset of these obsessive male leads. To give an example as well as help describe what I mean about the difference, we can talk about one episode is enough for the Unplayed. The basic premise is that the female lead gets reincarnated as the heroine of an otome game that they enjoyed while they were alive. Semi-standard thus far. The wrinkle is that she's already gone through the whole game once. She went through it, discovered that she hated all three male leads as people, and now has to do it again as the premise of the manhwa. That's not relevant to this conversation. Let's talk about the three male leads and their crimes. First of all, we have Jenin, whose whole thing is that he is a soldier, and he's very active and likes exercise and thinks everyone can, do the same things he can. And so he did a lot of, pulling Deborah into crushing hugs, not realizing he was hurting her, or running her ragged, trying to teach her how to ride a horse, which is bad. But the thing is, he wasn't aware there was a problem. Later on in the story, he becomes aware that there's a problem, and he feels genuinely bad about it and changes, what he's doing and how he approaches Deborah to match that. It's even pointed out later that in the first time she went through the game, he asked her if she was okay, and I don't blame her for saying that she was. It was a complicated situation. I want to make that very clear. But Jenin is basically a good kid. Next up is Reinfeldt. He is the crown prince and a total narcissistic prick. Falsely believes he's the smartest person in the room. He arrogantly explains simple ideas to people that already understand them. He reminds me of myself from back in high school, but hey. But the thing is that this all comes from deep-seated insecurity, and with some genuine emotional support, he does become a hell of a lot better. To clarify, and to be very clear, a fixer-upper is a trap. If someone's hurting you, do not proceed. I'm not saying that Reinfeldt is perfect or fine or his behavior isn't an issue. What I am saying is that he's a hell of a lot better than Cromwell. Cromwell, in the first round, waited for Deborah to be completely isolated from everyone around her, and then offered his help and cleaned up the nuisances from there. He is incredibly manipulative, knows what he's doing is wrong and is hurting Deborah, but he does it anyway. Cromwell also had a traumatic childhood, but A, that doesn't excuse anything, and B, he seems remarkably okay with it and uses it as a weapon in his emotional manipulation. I do not foresee any reasonable redemption of Cromwell. He's actively hurting Deborah to get his way and doesn't care at all how she feels about the whole thing. And it upsets me when Deborah's like, oh yeah, all three terrible male leads like Jenin and Cromwell are at the same level at all. Cromwell is the type of male lead I'm talking about. It's not just about their actions, but about how the story treats said actions. If the story fully just doesn't understand that the actions are bad, or is completely like, this is an evil thing to be doing, like, I understand what's happening there. If the actions are definitely supposed to be romantic, then at least from the author's side, I see the appeal. It's supposed to be romantic, I understand that. If it's fully just evil, I understand the appeal of, well, villains are hot. I understand that appeal. I don't understand when it's definitely treated as a bad thing, but is treated like any other character flaw. So there are three specific stories and male leads I want to talk about because I think they're the most interesting to go in depth about. And the first one I'm going to talk about, frankly, doesn't fit things that well because he does all that, don't get me wrong, we'll get there. But the main reason he's fun to talk about is because he's also incredibly pathetic. So, the manhwa is called... yeah, that's the name. Manhwa is called Can Someone Please Explain This Situation? The names are not good here. Circes here is a duke with a lover. His lover is the former dancer named Calendula. But he's not really allowed to marry her because she's a dancer and he's a duke. Furthermore, his parents are pushing for him to break up with Calendula and marry a nicer woman because she's a dancer and he's a duke. So Circes approaches our female lead Viola, the daughter of a poor aristocratic family, with an offer. He will pay off her family's debt in full if she agrees to enter a contract marriage with him, where she would basically be a nice woman to show the public and his parents as he continues being in love with Calendula. Viola is assured by her parents that they don't need the money, and Circes himself never tries to imply her house will be ruined otherwise or anything like that. She is assured a very comfortable life as a duchess without social obligations or needing kids. She's even allowed her own lover. Keep that one in mind. Oh, that was the exact line I wrote down. Luckily, Viola was never big into romance anyway, so she happily accepts the offer. Also keep that one in mind. So that's the premise. Viola is the pretend wife of Circes as he goes off and is in love with Calendula in the annex. Immediately, Circes is incredibly confused by the fact that Viola is actually treating the contract marriage like a contract. She has no misinterpretation about what her role is, and she's perfectly fine with Circes completely ignoring her and going to the annex with Calendula. Also, Viola really doesn't care for the extravagant lifestyle Circes leads or the lifestyle of a duchess with no responsibilities. As such, she spends most of her time interacting with the staff and helping them with various chores and household management tasks. This is a significant portion of the start of the book, but I'm going to gloss it over, as it's not about Circes who I'm talking about. At the start, Circes and Viola don't interact often. She greets him at the entrance when he gets back home. They barely talk, and Circes goes straight over to Calendula. The relationship only starts to change after Circes' The relationship only starts to change after Circes' parents come to visit. After all, one of the main reasons for the contract marriage is to trick his parents. So they have to act like an affectionate couple in front of them, including sleeping in the same room. Separate beds, don't worry about that. We're not there yet. During this visit, Cerces and his parents are blown away with how the manor has changed since Viola became the Duchess. Later, Cerces gives her permission to use his money as much as she likes to aid her efforts, and she refuses. This confuses Cerces. After the visit, Cerces starts coming over to have dinner with Viola frequently, which is greatly confusing to everyone involved because he should be with Calendula. Quickly, I'm going to remind you of a few facts and share some new information. So, Cerces and Viola have a contract marriage. They're in that marriage because Cerces is in love with Calendula and spends his time with her. Also, basically every conversation they've had has included Cerces abruptly changing the subject to sing Calendula's praises. Also, once again, the contract marriage specifically allows Viola to have a lover. Alright? During these dinner conversations, if Viola makes even an innocuous comment about a male servant, Cerces gets pissy. My brother in Christ, you're the one with a mistress! Side note, basically all the staff hate Calendula and are disappointed in Cerces, and it is hilarious watching them be so ecstatic every time Cerces leaves Viola alone. Eventually, Cerces comes to her with an invitation to the royal banquet, saying they need to attend. Thing is, their contract explicitly states that she has no social obligations. Viola makes this clear, asks why he isn't going with Calendula, doesn't get an answer, then agrees because it's a royal banquet and she is the Duchess. There's not a whole lot relevant to talk about with the banquet, but after they get back, Cerces casually announces that he's going to sleep in the main palace tonight instead of in the annex with Calendula. I should also note that while Cerces is around, Viola can't really help with the servants as much, so she's not living as happily as she normally does. Also, Cerces' extravagant and wasteful meals don't sit right with her, so she tries to eat a lot of breakfast and falls ill. I'm basically just saying that Viola is at her happiest when Cerces is in the annex with Calendula. It becomes clear to the staff that Cerces isn't spending time with Viola to escape some fight with Calendula, but because he's becoming interested in Viola herself. Anyway, Cerces eventually tells Calendula that while he loved the time he spent with her, he has to accept that he is in a position of power and responsibility and breaks up with her. He then confesses his love to Viola, who responds, not well. Yeah! An important part of their relationship that I haven't really talked about up till now, for the sake of a dramatic reveal, is that she has no affection for him. And I mean no affection for him. Like, she doesn't hate him, she just doesn't really care about him. She even mentions at one point that about the most she feels about his looks is, yeah, he's pretty. Viola even calls him out on how he's basically two-timing. Like, was enamored with Calendula, had a transitionary period where he was interested in both of them, and in a relationship with both of them, and then has fully switched over to Viola, expecting it to work out because now he's enamored with her, and shouldn't that just work? Anyway, Calendula leaves and Cerces whisks Viola upstairs to revise their contract. Surprise, surprise, the revised contract basically says, we are married now. None of this pretend shit. Now then, he doesn't overtly coerce her into agreeing to the contract and even lets her add conditions of her own, but he also doesn't seem to give her any actual out for it if she didn't want to be married. Also, we can see her internal monologue and see that she makes her decision basically because he paid off her family's debt. So, gonna just put the dubious consent tag on this one and move on. To quickly run through some shit Cersei gets up to after this, he gets jealous of how close Viola is with some male servants before realizing the servant is married, happily. His parents visit again, requiring him and Viola to sleep in the same room, and he adds a bunch of tasks at the last minute, so the staff is too busy to put a second bed in the room, and they have to sleep together. And he goes on a highly extravagant date with her that she does not enjoy, and is clearly, visibly uncomfortable with the entire time. He only realizes at the end of the day that he fucked up, and says he had no idea. Bruh. Fucking look at the girl you're enamored with. She's not fucking hiding it! This leads to what I believe is the funniest moment in this manhwa, where Cersei talks to all of the servants to learn more about Viola's likes and dislikes, and then completely redoes the interior of the annex to better match Viola's interests. And he does that properly. But the funny part is that he says he did it because he was sure she had a bunch of bad memories associated with the annex. Here's the thing. Viola never set foot in the annex. She doesn't know what the fuck it looked like before. And furthermore, she didn't give a shit about Calendula and that he was in love with her. That was the selling point! Also, he did all that market research, but never pieced together that she's not a fan of grand gestures and all the money that would be spent on it. Like, look at the girl you're enamored with. Anyway, outside of that, everything is roughly par for the course. So let's move on. So the second series I want to talk about is called I Want to Escape from Princess Training. Various parts of the story are told in a flashback later on, so I'll just change up the order of events so it's a continuous story. As a child, Lady Letitia and her family visited the royal palace. Letitia is a very lively and precocious child, so she starts climbing a tree and taking a nap up there. She ends up falling out of that tree onto the Crown Prince Clark, who falls in love immediately and asks to be married to her. To be absolutely fair, at this point, she's totally into the idea. Then she spends 10 fucking years in hellish princess training where every aspect of her deemed unladylike is drilled out of her with force. She's separated from her friends and family. She's locked up in a single place, etc. for 10 years. Her only solace is that if Prince Clark falls in love with someone else, she can be free. One day, shortly before they're to be married, Clark shows up to a ball arm in arm with another lady, Brianna. Letitia is given the impression that their engagement is cancelled. She excitedly whoops, hollers, and gets the fuck out of there, heading to some remote countryside where she excitedly fishes from a stream and does all the things she was never allowed to do. At which point, Clark shows back up and says, "Actually, I was just trying to make you jealous. The engagement isn't off, I'll pick you up later today." Also, during this conversation, Letitia screams about how she was, let's be honest, abused every day for 10 years because of him. And his response is, well, you never told me, so go fuck yourself. Then Brianna shows up, explains how she went through some of the princess training and couldn't handle it, and begs for Letitia to return. She also reveals that Clark made a public announcement that he will not have kids with anyone but Letitia. Not only making their private matters excessively public, but also putting Letitia into a situation where refusing to be with him could actually ruin his livelihood. Pretty important for the next king to have heirs. Then it becomes, oh Letitia, surely you don't hate me enough to want to ruin my life over some bad blood. I should note, for fairness, that he doesn't do that. But that is the vibes that move gives off. Anyway, Letitia obviously tries to run away in the dead of night. She gets caught by Clark, who basically just fucking kidnaps her, taking her to the royal palace. She's even separated from her maid she's very close with, because they're too close. Yep, just cutting her off from any potential support networks that the only worldview she can hear agrees with Clark. Also, Clark asks if she hates him, and her response is no for some reason. He then kisses her cheek because obviously that was an invitation. He takes her back to the palace, shows her all the changes he made to please her, tells her she doesn't need to do the training anymore, and asks her if she's still opposed to the marriage. She says that she is, so he locks her up until they can get married. Romance. She tries to escape a few times, but is repeatedly caught by Clark. They end up putting bars in her fucking windows. Can I use the Harry Potter clip without getting struck to hell? Also, everyone she's allowed to interact with is 100% on Clark's side and is constantly arguing for him, trying to make Letitia feel bad for not being in love with him, arguing that Clark had no choice but to lock her up. It's gross, and they're all just like, well, it's love. Fuck off. Also, they fucking publish a romance novel based on them, where the pair's true love gives Letitia the strength to overcome the princess training. So literally the entire country is celebrating their love and marriage, except Letitia. And, like, that doesn't really come up again. But the fuck? Also, Brianna says this in response to Letitia getting pissed about being locked up. Letitia responds to that by trauma dumping, common response, which Brianna just sort of goes, that's fucked. And that's the scene. Then Letitia looks for a secret passage that might help her escape, and she discovers that there is a secret passage to Prince Clark's bedroom. Because of fucking course! He then traps her in said room, and this happens, and they spend the night cuddling against her will. Also, Letitia talks about this with her brother, who says, you're engaged, these things happen. I don't need to explain the many issues with that statement, right? By the way, Clark fully wants to continue doing those things, and Letitia has to fucking fight to get him to stop. The people around her then treat Clark like the victim in this circumstance, because he looked so dispirited when you told him to stop violating you. Ah! I did mention earlier that Letitia was on board with the engagement as a child. In fact, she even said that she loves him. I should note, though, that Letitia doesn't remember this, and the royal family's proof is a painting they had commissioned. I do think it actually happened, and the young puppy love was overshadowed by years of abuse, but still. I also find it absurd how Letitia saying this as a 7-year-old who knows nothing about anything is being held over her now as some proof that you were always in love with Clark the whole time. Surely that hasn't changed in 10 years. Like, you couldn't have possibly emotionally developed and matured in the past 10 years. You were too busy being abused. Then they have an engagement party, more publicly announcing their engagement. Letitia's parents are there and just fine with what's going on. Nothing too noteworthy happens in the party itself, but she is quickly captured by assailants in black clothing. The narration says that Letitia was kidnapped for the first time in her life. Actually, it's the second, but who's counting? Anyway, yeah, that kidnapping. She's fine, don't worry. The kidnappers were a prince of a neighboring kingdom and his attendant, and they meant to kidnap Letitia's maid. Because the prince is in love with her, you see. It's romantic? Anyway, Clark obviously catches up, and various things I don't care about happen. And this is where, finally, they have a fucking conversation. Before that, though, Letitia has a conversation with her brother. Her brother says things like, Clark respects your will as long as you don't run away. He fully respects your will and will always be supportive of what you want to do. Unless what you want to do is not get married to him. That's a no-go. That's a deal breaker. How dare you? Her brother then says, if you don't marry Clark, I'll just have you marry someone else. He also reveals that basically all of this has been a plan that he made. Like, to explain, let's go back to the start again. Clark, all those years ago, basically immediately noticed Letitia was not doing okay with the princess training. He knew it was happening because of their engagement, but he didn't want to give her up. He just didn't know what to do, and sort of did nothing while pondering what he could do. For 10 years. Eventually, their wedding was about to come up and nothing had changed, so he asked her brother what he should do. Her brother then concocted the whole plan where he would appear with Brianna, seemingly in an attempt to make Letitia jealous, but actually to get her to take her mask off. Her brother also suggested that Clark lock her up to make sure she didn't run away. A lot of this comes off almost like a retcon. Like, the authors saw how poorly received Clark was, so they pushed all of the blame onto Letitia's brother, and turned Clark into someone so hopelessly in love that he would even follow the plans of this jerkwad. I'm not saying that's the actual behind-the-scenes reasoning, but rereading the earlier chapters with this in mind just makes Clark's actions fucking bizarre. Also, it still doesn't paint Clark in that positive a light. Oh, the love of my life is being physically and emotionally abused because of me. I'll wait 10 years and then follow her brother's insane advice to get her to smile again. Adding on to this, they make the point several times that her brother actually wanted Clark to, well, rape Letitia. But he didn't, so I guess Clark is a pretty good guy after all. Never mind the fact that the reason he didn't wasn't because that's a fucked up thing to do, but because he was embarrassed. Also that, if he did, he would never be able to have her. Again, these points really don't make Clark look any goddamn better. Also, later, they rehire the old maid she was separated from and make it clear that it was always the plan to bring her support system back once she had given in. Don't know how that's supposed to make things better. So around here, I should mention that I have, in my recap, been skipping over the various scenes where Clark and Letitia actually get along and get closer to each other. And at this point of the story, they communicate and kind of work out what they want to do. And some people may wonder, well, doesn't that kind of invalidate my points? And no. One, even mutual attraction does not justify these kinds of actions, and frankly, that has not been established. Two, she's never really been made aware of any other options. Ever since she was 7, she hasn't been presented with any other possible options than marrying Clark. The only time she was allowed anything else was the 2 days she was free at the start, and was the happiest we have ever seen her. I'm not necessarily saying she has Stockholm Syndrome or not, but I'm saying that we can't tell because she's never been allowed to be her own person for any significant period of time. 3. It's pointed out here that Letitia, when she has feelings she doesn't understand, runs away rather than facing them. And that's a reasonable sort of romantic character flaw to have and learn to deal with. The problem is that it's being presented as being on the same level as Clark's whole thing of pushing ahead regardless of consent, when the two are not equivalent in the slightest. And 4, this is a wildly imbalanced power dynamic. Anyway, beyond this point, there isn't a whole lot I want to talk about in this series. I mean, there's the fact that the very next day, Letitia is tricked into the actual wedding ceremony, but like, are we surprised? It's just showing that nothing's actually changed now that she's consented. Anyway, it was a lot of fun reading the comments section on this one, because like 90% of them were, hey, this male lead is broken, can we get a new one? About 8% were defending his actions, and 1% was, whatever the fuck this is. Now, the last series I want to talk about today is called I Became a Maid in a TL Novel. TL meaning teen love, I think. Our female lead this time is Nina Cage. Fun fact about Nina Cage, she's 14 years old. But this is a shoujo isekai specifically, so while Nina here is our female lead, this sickly girl named Ha-yoon actually died, got her soul transported to this world, and now puppets the walking corpse that once was Nina Cage. We know the genre! Anyway, Nina was raised in a religious orphanage and has moved to the capital of a semi-hostile country to work as a poison tester maid in the palace. Specifically, the poison tester maid assigned to Serapi, the magical saintess of the same religion as Nina's orphanage, who was forcefully kidnapped by King Ricardo to act as basically Magic Advil. Important context. In the novel that Ha-yoon read, Nina grew close to Serapi, tried to help her escape, and was killed by Ricardo. Ricardo and Serapi didn't fuck, apparently. A lot. By the way, Ricardo here, who kidnapped and imprisoned the Saintess, is kind of treated like a god by his people, and whose age is never confirmed, but is definitely a grown-ass man. He's the male lead. Fun fact about Nina Cage, she's 14 years old! Anyway, Ricardo and Nina meet, and Ricardo keeps referring to her as a rabbit, and says that she feels cool to the touch. Yeah, for a while, the extent of Ricardo's interest in Nina is that she resembles a combination of a rabbit he had as a child and an ice pack. Nina is later informed of all of her duties. Poison testing, human experimentation, typical maid activities, when all of a sudden, the head maid just sort of goes, oh yeah, His Majesty wants you. She then says, you have to be there before and after His Majesty takes his night's rest. Don't ever forget that His Majesty's order is of utmost importance. Moving right along, Serapi uses her holy powers to diagnose Nina's weak heart, which hits her hard because that's how Ha-yoon died. Serapi then uses her powers to heal said heart, which Nina is obviously very grateful for, but she faints from the process. Start a tally. Nina wakes up in bed with Ricardo. Fun fact about... Yeah, so... I mentioned that Ricardo was using Serapi as Advil. Well, that relies on physical contact, so he sleeps at night with her in the same bed, their hands tied together. And apparently, when setting that up, he decided to include the unconscious 14-year-old. Because why not? I guess. So then Nina makes some comments about how grateful she is to therapy for, saving her life. Ricardo, hearing this, gets pissy, says, "Everything in this palace belongs to me, including you," and grabs her fucking throat. I'm sorry. What? To be clear, he does not strangle her. There's no evidence to suggest that he puts any force or pressure on her throat. But what the fuck? Behind closed doors, Ricardo makes the comment that if Nina were to misunderstand her position, they could deal with her then. But she seems to know her place. And then the chief of palace staff shows up in Nina's room in the dead of night and tells her to take floral scented baths every day. Does not tell her why. But we can take a few guesses. Fun fact! The very first said bath she takes, the prince barges in, causing her to rush to cover up, trip, and give herself a serious head injury. Like, she was unconscious for 5 fucking days and would have died were it not for her magic powers. At their next meeting, Ricardo picks Nina up and orders her to not die without my permission. She responds, "Little I could do about an accident," and he gets pissy. Ricardo continues to incessantly refer to Nina as a rabbit and compare her to the one he had when he was younger. He then, in the same breath, starts telling Nina about his childhood surviving in the wilderness to avoid being killed by the previous queen. Not his mother, but the prince's. Not totally relevant. And he finishes up the conversation by telling Nina to stay with him instead of the prince because he doesn't want to share things he likes with his brother. And then the former queen tries to murder Nina. Saying more about it only really gets into the prince's character, which is not what the video is about. But Nina's having a rough fucking time. While she is unconscious and recovering, she is resting not in the infirmary, but Ricardo's personal chambers, with Ricardo personally hand-feeding her while she's unconscious. And the literal moment she awakes, before being able to process anything, he has her fully in his arms. But she asks why she's there, and his response is, "I wanted you here." Great. Go fuck yourself. She's then sort of kept there for a few days against her will. Later, Nina's talking with the head of the Knights, and he's talking about how Ricardo will likely not abandon Nina forever, even if he gets a wife and kids. This freaks out Nina, and she makes a comment about maybe running away. Before she can finish, the knight stops her and seriously warns her to never let anyone hear her say that, even as a joke. This whole time she's just like, "But I'm not lonely anymore." And it's like, girl. To be fair, most of the people in her life are pretty warm, positive influences. After the 3rd or 4th time she falls unconscious, the head researcher tells Ricardo, "If you ever get bored of her, send her over to me." A moment so gross, the fan translators call it out. Something I have never seen before. Ricardo makes a comment about Nina's body smelling sweet, but that's neither here nor there. Nina becomes the apprentice of the head researcher, trying to get on the path to a stable, independent life. Ricardo is not happy about this and makes reference to the rabbit thing again. Nina asks what a rabbit is even supposed to do, Like, what is she to be spending all of her time doing in the future if Ricardo gets his way? His response: when I call for you, you're there. And then he has the gall to say, you seem to find it difficult, referring to the several times she almost fucking died, as if the worst part of that, for both parties, was that her attendance was suffering. Nina says, that's pretty unavoidable. And Ricardo responds with, I will pay you whatever to just stick around and not do anything. Surprisingly, Nina's not too happy with the offer. A quick side note, a lot of the previous kings of this country were addicted to narcotics to deal with the hereditary pain that Ricardo is using therapy for now. This ruined their lives, made them absolutely terrible kings, and weakened the country itself. Ricardo uses this background to tell Nina that he has become addicted to her, a 14-year-old girl, and that he doesn't regret it at all. Now, I know love is like drugs is a common metaphor, but as an analogy, comparing your dating life to the opioid crisis feels like a poor move. Then he says, I know you don't like me, and proceeds to explain how he will never let her go no matter what, even as she is actively rebutting him. Nina starts crying because of all this, by the way. A lot of plot things happen. Nina gets arrested because of her drug blood. Long story. That drug blood puts a target on her. Ricardo uses this as a reason to keep Nina close and graciously allows Nina to get educated as a researcher. Nina realizes she's in love with him while in a jail cell. Normal stuff. Now for the really fucked up thing Ricardo does. Some relevant background first. Nina and Serapi are really close and are technically from the same religion. Also, the religion is technically Catholicism. They say that several times. I'm gonna leave that topic at the fucking door. Also, there was this other maid that has been a bitch to Nina this entire time for various reasons. Nina really doesn't like her, but has made sure that she didn't lose her job after a particularly bad incident. So, this other maid tries to help Serapi escape like Nina would have in the original novel. Ricardo catches them, tells Serapi that she's nothing but a disposable pawn for the church anyway, and then uses Nina without telling her beforehand and her hatred for the church to just kick her while she's down. Then, in her broken state, offers her a better life than the church could/would offer her as long as she continues playing Advil before leaving, ordering Nina to follow him so she can't comfort Serapi. And then he says, hey, that other maid, her brother helped and he was already put to death. She should be put to death. But what do you think? Nina rightfully tells him to fuck off with that shit. Ricardo gives Nina a ridiculously expensive necklace that she does not want and orders her to wear it every day. Nina unloads on him for being selfish, and Ricardo's response is not saying anything to her because she fell unconscious again, and instead calling a meeting of his top advisors and telling them that he's going to keep Nina by his side regardless of what any of them have to say about it. Also, the head researcher from before says that he's just going to wait until their relationship inevitably fails and presumably take Nina from there. Fun fact about Nina, okay, she's 15 now, which really isn't different, but someone would have pointed it out.
Plot things happen. The Pope steals the body of a young girl with the help of a girl named Juicy, tries to blow up Nina, and then says this. There's a time skip.
Ricardo punishes Mina at one point by having her sit on his lap while he works. Fun fact! There was a time skip, she's 20 now. Which is only marginally better. Also, at some point over the time skip, one potential candidate for queen tries to stab Mina. Also, Sarah P falls in love with Ricardo. Somehow. Anyway, I think that's all I want to talk about with that one. The comments on this one were a pain in the ass to read. Because there were several people arguing about, oh, it was normal in this time period for there to be couples with large age gaps between them and teenagers getting married to full-on adults. Or, oh, the king is 20, so it's only a 5-year age gap. I have never seen his age stated in the story itself. Maybe I missed something.
Hey, so I skimmed through the manhwa again. Maybe I'm still missing a direct statement, but I found some evidence to suggest that he is at least 21, perhaps older based on just how long he was in the woods. We don't really know. But even this evidence, like, based on the way people casually talk about spans of time, he could easily still be 20, so whatever.
And I cannot determine if there is a genuine argument to be had here at a debate about what makes things taboo, and if the same modern standard should apply to all fictional settings, or if it's a grown man trying to fuck a child. To be clear, I do think these series are fun, interesting reads. I would not have read far enough into them to be able to make this video if they weren't. Well, except Princess Training. That one is laser focused on the relationship and just uncomfortable. It is nothing but uncomfortable. I follow every update of I Became a Maid in a TL novel because it just keeps pulling out new shit that I didn't think it would do. And it has some genuinely interesting character stuff. Like genuinely interesting stuff that I did not cover because it wasn't Ricardo. And that's what this video was about. And there are series that have obsessive male leads that aren't so about it. 3 that are particularly good are The Villainess Wants to Marry a Commoner. Even though I'm a super timid noble girl, I accepted the bet from my cunning fiancé. And an observation log of my fiancé who calls herself a villainess. The main common component these stories have that make the obsessive male lead more or less work is that there is genuine, well-established mutual affection between the male lead and the female lead, which means the male lead can spend more time being incredibly supportive of the female lead and the things they want to do, and less time forcing them into a relationship. Turns out, that makes for a much healthier relationship. And of course you can ask the question of, if that mutual affection weren't there, would they be exactly as bad as every other male lead I've talked about today? And they sort of land on a sliding scale from maybe, maybe not, to explicitly yes. I'm not saying they're better, but the story doesn't have them doing that and then trying to make it like just a normal romantic thing. So it's a better read, is what I'm saying. Also, the super timid noble girl one is fun because, like, it's a thing to claim various fictional characters as autistic, but, like, she is. Also, I would be remiss to make a video about obsessive male leads and how they're actually fucking terrifying, and not talk about the lady likes a nerd over princes. Because this manga has a character who is a prince who is obsessively in love with the female lead and does a bunch of fucked up shit. Not quite like what we've seen today. They're subverting slightly earlier tropes than what I've talked about today, but the same general vibe, and is explicitly villainous, and is the antagonist of the story that is overcome by the end. It's a lot of fun, it's a great read, I recommend it. I will note that the female lead's most prominent personality trait is being head over heels in love with the actual male lead, who's the character that actually gets things done in the plot. So I wouldn't exactly call it a feminist victory, but like, hey, that's fucking cool. I feel like the video needs a conclusion. I don't know what the fuck that conclusion would be, though. Read Inso's Law. That has very little to do with obsessive male leads, but fucking read it.